Welcome to the Dolby Music Community Sessions. I'm Ben Guyvers with Dolby Laboratories in Los Angeles. And in this month's session, I am so excited to welcome from Evergroove Studios in Evergreen, Colorado, mix engineers Brad Smalling and Athena Wilkinson to take us on a deep dive into their mix process for hard rock and metal music. They're going to break down their session using a track by the metal band Periphery, including how to maintain that big rock punch and honor creative intent. Stay locked in for that. That is coming right up. Also, Dolby's Emma Brooks is here to share an overview of the exciting new Dolby Atmos Music Network for women and the great activities they're engaged in, bringing together female and non-binary mix engineers from around the world, and we'll share how more mixers can get involved in that great organization. As always, Greg Stryke Chin joins from his studio in Miami to share his pro mix tips, and in this edition, he features 4 tips for using the Dolby Atmos album assembler, helping you to put those finishing touches on your tracks and albums of ADMs. Please add your questions for the group, including your name in the Q&A function here. Many questions we answer back to you in real time during the session, and we'll also answer many live at the end. Zap the QR code on the screen now to opt into our creators database, where you'll get invites for upcoming sessions and the latest updates to the tool set and events happening around Dolby Atmos music. With that, let's jump into Greg's Pro Mix tips, followed by our deep dive chat with Brad and Athena. All right, always great to step into the studio with Greg Stryke Chin and learn his Pro Mix tips. What's up, Greg?
What's happening, Ben? Good to be here, as always.
Good to have you, as always. All right, so for this session, you're sharing 4 tips for using the Dolby Atmos Album Assembler, which of course is the tool for putting those finishing touches on your tracks and albums. Take it away.
You called it, Ben. Thank you so much. Yeah, this was meant to be just, four quick tips to kind of get folks into the album assembler. It's a very simple tool, but there's a lot of intricacies and a lot of stuff that actually goes into it. So as I started going into these tips, I actually figured what I would do. This is going to be part 1. So I'm going to give you 4 Dolby Atmos album assembler tips today. And then next month, I've got a few more for you. So let me just get right into it. So here we have the album assembler. And as Ben said, this is a really easy to use tool that's been created to help you apply those finishing touches to your songs and your albums. Really allows you to get your ADMs in and kind of arrange them in a way that you can then export and render them out as a Dolby Atmos album. So let me just jump right into it. So here we have the Dolby album assembler. You can see I've got a couple of tracks in here, actually 3 songs. I've started to assemble an album, so to speak. And you'll see that we have our ADMs loaded here. I just import those ADMs. And I also have the stereo reference versions of those songs. So I've got the stereo versions right underneath, and the ADMs are above that, right? So the album assembler, if you launch it on its own, this is tip number 1, it does not work on its own. It works in conjunction with the renderer. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our Dolby Atmos renderer. And you'll notice right away that our local host, I'm going to go ahead and there's the albums, the renderer there. I've got my output down because we're not going to be actually listening back to any of the audio playing back. Put that to the back there. And tip number 1 is just make sure that you've got the Dolby Atmos renderer launched as well. So you can see now we're using the same computer for both the renderer and the album assembler. Local host is on. You can see that we're green. Green means go, so we are now good to go. So obviously now we can actually, if you've got ADMs loaded, you can hit play, and not only will you get a little metering there, kind of letting you know exactly what's going on with your audio. If you go into your render at the same time, here on the render, you can actually see exactly what's going on in your ADM. Okay, that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, let's talk a little bit about markers. So again, we've got a few ADMs loaded here. We've got actually 3 songs, our sad song, 02 wave, and our V track. These are the 3 songs that currently make up this album that I've kind of created in my mind. And, as you're navigating through the space of the album assembler, you might want to be able to just kind of get through these kinds of these ADMs or the stereo renders pretty quickly. Markers are a really easy way to do that. So right here, we've got the album assembler loaded. if we click right up here on the timeline menu item here, you can see that we've got all of these different markers that we can add. So I'm going to actually jump down and first call out, you can insert markers at the Dolby Atmos clip boundaries. If I click that, what that's going to go ahead and do is now create markers at the beginning and end of every single one of these ADMs. So if you take a look, you zoom in here, you can see now that we've got these markers right here. And you can see that as I highlight the marker, it's also highlighting their respective ADM, and it's actually titled, each one of those markers is titled for that ADM. Now, additionally, because we have our stereo references here, if we wanted to actually have markers that correspond to the stereo reference instead, we can actually do that by, again, going up to our timeline menu and clicking Insert Markers at Stereo Clip Boundaries. Now, when we do that, if we already have markers there for something else, we're going to get this pop-up window that's going to let us know that doing so will remove any existing markers. So let's go ahead and do that. And now, same markers because everything is exactly in the same place, but now these markers actually correspond to the stereo reference. Now, those markers are great. Now, to be able to get through them, we want to be able to get through them pretty quickly. Luckily, there's shortcuts for that, so I'm going to share some of those shortcuts quickly. Remember, if you don't remember a shortcut for getting through any of the markers or the timeline, they're found right here under the timeline menu. So if we click on timeline, you can see that every single one of these go to next or go to previous is going to have a shortcut next to it. So let's just go ahead and start. So I've got some markers here. If I wanted to go from wherever I am in the timeline to the next marker, we're going to use the command key and the left and right arrows. So the right command and right will go to the next marker, and then command left arrow will go to the previous one. We don't have the Dolby Atmos clip boundaries on, but if we did, let's just go ahead and do that really quickly just so I can show it. So let's go ahead, insert markers at the Dolby Atmos ADM clip markers firm. The shortcut for getting and navigating through that, really simple. It's going to be Option and left and right arrows, okay? Now, of course, we have the same thing, very similar for if you're working with the stereo clip boundaries. We go ahead and quickly create those. And instead of we're just going to add the Shift command to that. So it's going to be Option, Shift, and then left and right arrow, all right? Really, really easy, right? So right now we're demystifying the album assembler for everybody. Hope that's helpful. All right, next tip, number 3, copy and paste. So we've got some really great tools specifically for the ADMs. The album assembler, again, really easy tool to assemble your albums. You can do some, as you're assembling your album, when you're mixing songs, maybe not every song has the same, EQ or dynamic feel that as the previous one. Maybe you want to kind of play with that a little bit, even things out a little bit. We've got some kind of simple mastering tools that are built into the album assembler to help you with that. So specifically, I'm going to call out the equalizer and the limiter. Now, the bottom third here, you'll notice if you go to the stereo file, that all disappears. The stereo references, you can't make any changes to those. Those are there specifically for reference. Now, as we go back up and click on one of the ADMs, you'll notice that that bottom third repopulates with some tools that we have to at our disposal. So specifically the equalizer and limiter. Right now, nothing's on, and this is a per track basis. This is not a global setting. These are per track, so per ADM. So for instance, if I highlight on sadsong.wave right here, I'm going to go ahead and punch my EQ in. My EQ is now on. If I wanted to edit that EQ, I simply hit the edit button for that. EQ comes up, and let's just say I made some, basic changes. Let's say I wanted to actually copy that, and I actually wanted to apply this EQ setting to a different ADM. I can do that a couple of, copy and paste very easily, a couple different ways to do it. So here in the Options tab, I can just select Copy EQ Settings here, or in the ADM itself, I can right-click and choose Copy EQ Settings. So you see we've got Copy EQ Settings, Paste EQ Settings. We'll go to the limiter here in a second. So as I go over now to the second ADM, you can see that the EQ is not on, and if I click Edit, you can see that it's just totally just everything's leveled at 0, and the EQ is not in. I can simply just right-click on that ADM and hit paste EQ settings. Now, you'll also notice that the EQ is still not activated. I will need to activate and punch that EQ in for it to be active. But once I click the edit button here on that EQ, you'll see that the settings are now there. Same thing applies to our limiter. I'm going to go ahead on the third track here, and I'm going to go ahead and click edit on our limiter, bring it into the space here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. And let's just say we've made some changes. Again, we're not looking for specific settings here. We just are concerned with making sure that we're able to copy and paste those settings. So again, I can just going to go ahead and under the options menu, copy the limiter settings. And then let's say I wanted to copy that on the first track. I just then click on my first track, and I just simply right click on the ADM and paste those limiter settings. And again, to have the limiter actually on, I'm going to have to turn it on by instantiating it, or basically turning it on by clicking the in button. All right. That is tip number 3. All right. I've got one more for you. And this one, you've been hearing us talk a lot about LFE over the last few community sessions, and because it's really important. So in a pinch, if you happen to have an ADM that maybe had been sent back, had been rejected in the QC process because they found a lot of mid and high information, frequency information in your LFE, and maybe you're out on the desert and you don't have access to the studio and you need to be able to send it back in. If you happen to have a laptop on the desert island and power, hopefully internet, you can actually load that ADM right into the album assembler, and each one of these tracks, right now it's currently off, but there is a low pass, an LFE low pass filter right here, and go ahead and click that. On the LFE channel only, it is going to go ahead and basically you're going to filter everything from 120 hertz up automatically. Now, this is great to use in a pinch. You do want to make sure that if you go ahead and use this, it may change some of the output level of your ADM because of the amount of information that you may be now removing from the track overall. So you're going to want to take a listen, use your ears, check it, make sure you also go back into the renderer, check your LUFS and your true peak. And if it sounds good with the LFE off just like that, then you're good to go ahead and re-render that ADM, and you should be good to go. So those are my 4 quick tips for the Dolby Atmos album assembler, part 1. Next month, come back. We're going to do some more on the album assembler. We'll talk about some different ways that you can lay your ADMs out. We'll talk about analyzing loudness, how you can do that both in the album assembler and using a really great tool in the renderer as well. I want to do those kind of together. We'll talk about fades and a whole lot more. So make sure you come back. And with that, I'll say thank you. Look forward to all the questions, and I'll turn it back over to you, Ben. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for sharing those, man. Great set of tips as always. And for viewers, please add your questions for Greg. We answer many of them right back to you in the Q&A function here in big markers. So please add your name along with your question, and Greg will answer those. Also, if you need the Dolby Atmos album assembler and the Dolby Atmos renderer, zap the QR code on the screen now or head to professional.dolby.com to grab a free 90-day trial download for those. We also have a ton of quick start videos and deep dive videos, previous community sessions at our pro site and our YouTube channel. All right, now let's get into our conversation where we go deep into mixing hard rock and metal with Brad and Athena of Evergroove Studios. All right, we are so happy to welcome our friends from Evergroove Studio in Evergreen, Colorado to the community sessions. Engineers Brad Smalling and Athena Wilkinson, thank you both so much for doing this, and it's great to see you both.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing us on. We're really happy to do this and talk a little bit about mixing in Atmos.
Yeah, it's an honor. It's an honor to be on, and the community sessions y'all do are so valuable to provide education and information to engineers and us and everything that we're trying to all do. So thank you so much for the community effort there.
Well, thank you. The honor is all ours. So we're going to get deep into your Atmos mix process, and you'll share a session from a progressive metal band called Periphery that we'll get into here in a moment. But maybe you can share a little bit about background about yourselves and the studio and how you integrated your system at Evergroove. We'll start with you, Brad.
Oh, sure. Evergroove is celebrating 18 years this year. And we've been really fortunate to survive a pandemic and, all sorts of economic downturns. We've just grown slowly and steadily. And it was in 2020 that I experienced Atmos for the first time. It was at NAMM. And then in 21, so I started making plans. And then in 21, we shut down for about 6 weeks, completely redid the control room and installed Atmos. And it's been fantastic ever since. Like, we're just working on amazing music and just rediscovering mixing. Like, it's just so inspiring to work in such a incredible format that's just taking us beyond stereo.
I interned here at Evergroove almost 7 years ago. And since then have kind of been involved here and there. Been very fortunate to have Brad as a mentor and who has taught me a lot in my audio engineering career. And after Evergroove installed it in 2021, I came on board in a more official capacity, I guess. I heard Atmos in 2022 for the first time, and it completely changed my life. It was, you know, after COVID and everything, not knowing kind of what I was doing with my life at the time, I heard it and I was like, this is it. I'm back. I want to do audio full time, and Atmos is the way. Through that, I've had the fortunate pleasure to work with Brad on such records as Of Mice and Men's latest album and Story of the Year's latest album, both in Atmos, along with some other great projects that we've come through.
That's awesome. Great story. And both great metal bands and rock bands that you just mentioned there, hard rock bands. And you've got a session from the incredible metal band, which we mentioned earlier, Periphery. And let's just say that this track is not exactly for the faint of heart, but it is incredibly complex and melodic and rhythmic and dynamic, right? So you've got a lot of it on your hands here. And that's probably the case with a lot of hard rock and metal when you're mixing it. But you're going to take us through a session. You're going to take us through layout and routing and then into your mix process. So let's jump into your session layout in Pro Tools. And I'm sure along the way, you'll share a bit about your philosophy when it comes to mixing this style of music in Dolby Atmos. Okay,
so heavy music and Atmos. In general, let's just start with basically, and this isn't just heavy music, but this is kind of what we do for, anytime that we're asked to mix something in Atmos when we're matching stereo. When we are working in stereo and Atmos in-house, when we're in charge of the stereo mix and the Atmos mix, our layout is a little bit different. But for today, we're going to focus on the idea of you've been tasked with, matching or bringing something that's already out in stereo into Atmos. And so to that, lately, we've really been enjoying working with object beds. And occasionally when we have some pretty, maybe not severe, but significant like automation, like really big automation moves, we'll create those as separate objects. But for the most part, we work inside of an object bed. And our object bed is a 916 object bed that gets created in Pro Tools using one of the Pro Tools presets. We like even though we're a 714 room, we like a 916 bed. We feel like it gives us a little bit more resolution. Even though we don't have those speakers, we can kind of understand what might be happening if we had those speakers in the room. And so what you're seeing here that I have highlighted right here, this 916, it's a routing folder that gets created when you create a new 916 object bed inside of Pro Tools. The one thing that we do differently is Pro Tools will automatically align these, L, C, and R. It'll start with 11. It'll go 11, 12, and 13. We change that. We go 11, and then center is 25. And then you'll see right here picks up as object 12. That way our pairs, our left and right wides, as things are in pairs, they are kind of what you would expect, odd and even channel assignments. And so then when you come back around to the center, then we come back to object 25. And so that's how that gets routed. This concept of right here, this bus assignment, 916 in and 916 out, those get created by Pro Tools when you use their preset. And so then we end up setting up a couple stem sections, which we'll talk about in just a second. But the one thing we really like to do is set up some routing folders. And so we bring the stems into a stereo mix routing folder. So see, these are all the stereo stems that we got from Periphery. Thanks, guys. And those get routed to stereo mix. Stereo mix goes to 916 in. 916 in is going all the way up here, as you see. Important to note that what we're doing here is the first thing you want to make sure is that do these align up and do they null? And so, if we were to, so now we're just hearing drums. This is, the track is Dracul Grass from Periphery 5, Gent is not a genre. And so you should be hearing drums. And so then what we like to do then, we come up here, try not to rush around the screen too much for you. This is the stereo pre-master from the stems. We created a special one that's just the instrumental. Even though we do have permission to use this track, to prevent any sort of copyright tagging, we've muted the vocals. Sorry, band. So if we were to select here, you'll hear. Okay, right? So then if I solo this stereo mix, you hear nothing. So it proves, it's showing that our stereo stems are nulling to our pre-master. And if I mute that pre-master, that'll verify. And this becomes a very important workflow that Athena is going to go over in just a minute about how we're constantly referencing back to the stereo pre-master or stereo master. We want to pay respect to what the artist did. We're not trying to break any sort of different, we're not trying to, it's fun to push some boundaries, but I had a very in-depth conversation with Periphery, and they didn't want to necessarily go too wild. They didn't want to tear down that fourth wall. They still wanted it to feel like the band. They still wanted to feel like the song. And so you won't necessarily see a whole lot of automation moves. So that's how we route that. We make sure that things are nulling. And then to talk about how we handle our stereo and Atmos stems, I'm going to turn it over to Athena.
Alrighty. Thank you, Brad. So as Brad mentioned, we like to have these two routing folders, one starting with the stereo stems that we received. What we do is we actually duplicate those stereo stems and put them into an Atmos routing folder. And this is where you'll see all of our actual Atmos mixing happens. A lot of the times our stereo mix routing folder ends up getting muted, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, actually, we end up referencing it quite a bit initially to help make sure that the Atmos mix is folding really nicely into the room and has a really nice seamless transition from the stereo feel. It's pretty straightforward. You just duplicate the stereo stems, put them into an Atmos folder, and they're the exact same information, lined up the exact same where we already checked that they're lined up to the stereo master or pre-master. So that's all good to go. The other thing I'll talk about real quick on our setup is our binaural settings. Now, these binaural settings are just how we start out. We've found these binaural settings to generally work in our 916 object bed in most of our mixes, but at the end of the day, we're always using our ears. So on a per song or per project basis, some of these elements might change. We've got left, right, and down here, we've got center as well. All of those are off. That feels really representative of kind of the stereo that a lot of people are used to, especially if you think of like a kick, snare, vocal that's going to hit more similarly with that binaural settings being off. Our initial kind of sides, left, right, wide, left, right, side surround. Those are nears. Our rears start at mid, and then all of our height speakers start at far. Now, with any mix that we're listening to, as we're referencing the binaural and QCing that as our final step, we're making sure that it's feeling good per song or per project. We're not just leaving this necessarily, but we have found that these settings are a really good starting point for us. Now, before I dive back into why we have these different routing folders for an Atmos and stereo and why we duplicate those stems, Brad is going to talk a little bit about our next step in the process, which is where we actually get into mixing and where we typically kind of start to have some placements in the room.
That's great. Thanks, Athena. And thanks, Brad. So just wanted to quickly interject, make sure that if any of you have questions, please do feel free to type them in the Q&A section here on Big Marker, and we'll do our very best to make sure we address those. So as Athena just said, Brad's going to kind of walk us through the mixing process. We've just kind of talked a little bit about with you your session layout, how you've kind of route things. So you're using a 916 object bed, kind of talking through the idea, not the idea, but the practice of making sure that things are lining up and matching, using this principle of nulling is super important. And you're actually going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of how things work out in the mixing process. So really excited to get on to the next part. So I'll turn it back over to you, Brad.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Yeah. So now we get into the meat of it. Y'all are tired of hearing us talk. I don't blame you. So let's actually listen to some drums. Everybody likes drums, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to hop down here into the stereo mix routing folder, and I'm just going to solo out the drums. Now, these are just left, right. I mean, it's a stereo routing folder that goes to the 916 in. So there's nothing to do there. So we're just going to play and listen to drums for just a second. Oh, it sounds so good. We're so fortunate to have stems from Periphery because the band just does such a great job. So like we talked about, what's really important is to think about the artistic intention. And so if we start pulling things off the front wall, things are going to change. And that's fine. One thing that Athena and I noticed is that as we've learned how to work in Atmos, as you're pulling things off the front wall, in our mind, we're not changing the volume. We're not changing the relative volume to the original positioning in the stereo master. But then what we were finding is like listening binaurally, listening to 2.0 re-render, things are louder, things are quieter. Like what's going on? And why are we always felt like we're kind of fighting things. And so then we're changing binaural settings, we're changing volume settings, and we're just like going through this process. And I said, what if it's as simple as that as we bring things off the front wall, they're getting louder? Because technically that's what's happening. As we bring things off the front wall, things are getting louder. And so that's what we noticed we were fighting. Like you placed all these things in the room and then you listen to headphones and your vocals are really quiet because you've taken all of these things off the front wall and moved them around and you've really turned everything up in relation to those vocals if we're leaving those more on the front wall. So we started playing with this concept. What we discovered was yes, and maybe this is not a revelation to anybody else, but we were pretty excited to find it. So let's highlight that section. I'm going to undo any of my routing here in this 916 panning. I'm in my my Atmos mix bed now. And so then let's come down to here. These drums should be at 0. These should be at 0. Cool. All right, so that is these drums. That's the stereo drums. Let's bring this panner up just so we can see it. That's our stereo drum panner. This is our Atmos drum panner. So I'm going to solo both of those. And then turn on this trim. This trim is all it's doing is inverting the polarity of the entire stereo mix. So I don't have to do it on each track. By inverting the polarity, we're going to see if we can get these things to null. And they're nulling pretty close, and I can tell you that it's because of these plugins. And then that's at 1.6. We'll go through why these are at 1.6, why these are at 2.2. And they're gone. So we know our drums, and they should be because they're panned left and right and they're on the front wall. So typically we like to keep drums fairly front wall, but I don't like to leave them on the front wall. It's exciting to me to get them into the room. It's exciting to me to be able to listen and feel the drums are at least a little bit in the room. They're a little bit more forward, but we do have to be careful because we want to maintain that punch and that impact that drums have. And as they come off the wall and start to wrap around behind you, we lose a little bit of that. So we found that we enjoy about 5% off the front wall, or 95. If you see me moving this around and entering in a key right here, we enjoy 95, minus 95, excuse me. Sorry, we enjoy 95. Sorry, y'all. All right, we don't have cancellation anymore, right? Notice now they're not canceling. That's because as we brought them off the front wall, they're louder. So unless we're going to go and turn everything else up relative to that, what are we going to do? Well, we're still listening to both tracks. So you can see they're both soloed out here and here. So let's listen again and just start to pull down those Atmos drums. Gone. So now our drums are off the front wall, but there's the same relative volume as the stereo mix. And following this procedure, track by track, which seems a little tedious, we have found creates consistency and unfolding that stereo mix and that stereo master into the room. Suddenly there aren't a lot of surprises, except for one caveat that Athena is going to cover in a little bit. Talk about that one. That one's a surprise. We're gonna throw you a little monkey wrench in the works there. That always goes back to using your ears, which you're going to start to hear us say, use your ears, use your ears. So let's go on to like for bass, for example. And so you notice that's a 1.9 dB difference. 5% off the front wall is almost a 2 dB increase in volume. So I'd like to hop over to the bass as just an example. I like my bass at 85 off, so 15% off the front wall. For me, that's that bass player just standing in front of the drum kit, right? Or maybe just at or in front of the bass drum, like a hi-hat side, like what you kind of like expect, right? And so when we play that against the bass, so we'll solo that, let's solo our bass. Okay, you're not hearing anything because I've already done the nulling, but if we undo it, okay, and that's because this is a bit higher right now. And let's bring this up for, there we go. Keep things kosher here. Cool. So they're nulling because they're where they are. The same panning position. So we go to 85 and I hit play. Bass is a lot louder, right? So let's pull that down. Excuse me. Pretty much gone. You won't get them to null 100% when you start pulling things off the front wall, but you're going to get it 99%. So we can throw a wrench in the work. So one thing that I really enjoy is when we go with bass is we go just 1% on the size, kind of fill the room just a little bit, right? Not too crazy. But when we do that, here we go again. Let's bring that back down. Okay, cool, great. So now we've got our drums and our bass this is just the Atmos ones. Versus, excuse me, those are the stereo ones versus the Atmos ones. Now, because we can't quite broadcast in Atmos just yet, what you're hearing is a 2.0 re-render. And so notice that the stereo stems versus the 2.0 re-render really didn't sound all that different. So that means if you go through this process, what you'll find is that the 2.0 re-render coming out of your Atmos mix is very, 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 very close, surprisingly close to the stereo master, stereo pre-master that you're trying to match. Right. So these are some of the typical places we start. And to that, I'm going to turn this back over to Athena. She's going to take us further into nulling, talking about some of the caveats as we get behind us, as we get above us, and some of the things that we've discovered that might surprise you.
Thank you, Brad. Really great introduction into a little bit of how we like to mix or start a mix. Again, everything that we do, this is kind of our starting placements, but as we listen to the mix, as Brad said, we always use our ears. So at the end of the day, we're constantly referencing the stereo and deciding like, okay, well, maybe we want to change that a little bit. And it can be song dependent, it can be project dependent, just like I was talking about with the binaural earlier. We will always just see what is going to suit the song and suit the genre best, because that's what we're all here for. Now, moving forward past drums and bass, we can start to get into guitars and heavy music. There's a few different ways that you could approach guitars. This is kind of typically where we like to start things. We've got it at 35 off the wall, just a touch of height with 2. We really feel that having the guitars kind of in the room a little bit makes it feel immersive, makes them hit really heavy like the genre deserves. And the beauty of this discovery with the nulling that we've done, and I'm not going to take you through the nulling process, but this is kind of the number we ended up at when matching with the stereo stem. But the beauty of it is that even though we're bringing these elements into the room, it's still matching the stereo intention wise, right? So yes, it is a different feel because it's a different format, but with any genre, but we have found, especially also with heavy music, it's really important to serve the genre, serve the music, and serve what the fans expect. And it's really great to have those guitars hitting hard in the room, but if we have them just in the room and we don't adjust for that volume at all, then it's just out of whack. It doesn't match the stereo as expected. So this is where we have some rhythm guitars. Some pretty classic proggy stuff. And then we've got kind of layered guitar, and you can see that this is further to the back. And we've got this number to null as appropriate. Something that we have really found, and this has actually been pretty recent, an element. So say we took this and we put it all the way on the back wall. I'm going to put the 0, height at 0. So that's, say we wanted to put those layered guitars all the way on the back wall. I probably wouldn't do that from a creative standpoint for this genre or this music, but there's a lot of different styles of music where you might do that, right? Technically, when nulling, let's find the layer. When nulling to the stereo, it would actually it nulls at +3, which when we discovered that, I was like, really? But yeah, but it's farther away, right? You might actually find heights on the height element when it's all the way up at the top. It's back at 0. That's something that we have found as well. But when we are playing this in the room, and we can't play it for you because we're not hearing Atmos, but when we play this in the room or when we're listening to the binaural, that element, when compared to the stereo master, sounds too loud. And it's because when you're in the room, it's right there, despite what nulling might tell you. It's very present, and it's right behind you, so you can actually hear it better than nulling would say. So that just goes to show that at the end of the day, while this nulling that we've discovered, the math, you might say, is very, very helpful for getting things to unfold into the room seamlessly and feel like a stereo mix, at the end of the day, you're always using your ears. And I think we have found generally, and this can depend on what it is, what feels better is actually closer to -1 if it's all the way on the back wall. So that's just really important to always use your ears. I can't say it enough.
These are great examples, and they're fantastic. And the way you guys kind of explain it, and the process of nulling, obviously, little time intensive, but it obviously makes such a huge difference in terms of creating that perceived loudness against the stereo version at the end of the day. So I'm going to ask you about QC a little later, but before that, considering the stems and the way you've got your object DUD set up, where things are all the objects are kind of set up in a way that they're static. So there's really no movement by design, because everything is nice and big and crunchy and very, very heavy. So this is meant to be that. But the process of attaining the null and really working with that, is there a process or an additional process that you consider or use if there's automation that happens where there's movement for an object?
Yes, it's not a perfect process, unfortunately.
It's a lot of kind of following the automation and kind of rechecking.
So what I've done, typically with automation, there has to be something very specific that we're trying to do. This is not metal music, but the best example I can think of, I've got local artists I'm working on mixes on that's blues. And there's a steel guitar that has some very melodic, beautiful moments, and I have it move through the room a little bit. As it's moving, it's changing volume, as you alluded to, Greg. So with I kind of did a painstaking process and did very specific automation, and I did my best to follow that volume-wise and kind of listen through. It's not perfect. It doesn't null, and getting to... trying to get to the point where it's a perfect null the whole way is almost not worth it. I hate to say that, but yeah, it takes way too long, and you've got multiple projects that you're working on in a day. But
you can certainly give yourself some timestamps and from here to here, you kind of check from here to here.
Yeah, exactly. So say I've just got an element that moves up in height a little bit. Say it goes from 0 to 50. I don't know. And this helps with experience. We both have a pretty good understanding of how much volume changes as you're moving through the room. And that's just through working in the format and doing this nulling. Say we got something that moves from a height of 0 to 50. I might just, if it's a pretty standard kind of straight line, just have the volume follow that to about like -3 dB as it gets to 50 in height. And that's it. Is it perfect? No, but it gets you a lot of the way there and still stays true to the intention of the original stereo mix.
Sure. The good thing is that you've got the rest of the objects that are static and obviously have been set up and they're null. So the perceived loudness is going to be there,
right?
With everything else. So now, thanks for letting me throw that monkey wrench in there.
Yeah.
I know that folks are going to be asking. It was certainly on my mind. I think you guys do a fantastic job of not just mixing and creating this stuff, but the way you're explaining it here is fantastic. So really appreciate you guys.
Well,
I know there's a couple of things you guys still want to kind of go through. So I think we're going to toss it back to Brad, and he's going to talk a little bit about LFE limiting, and then we've got one other thing at the end of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Brad has some really great points on LFE, especially for working with heavy music. So I'll let him take it over.
All right, thank you, Greg. That was a great question, a really great question. And yeah, I know one thing that I do, like with the whole automation thing and volume matching, is what I like to do is just simply from its starting point have it null, because you could typically we put stuff where it goes and then it nulls in that moment. But in my mind, then once it moves, that is the immersive part. If it gets louder as it's coming to me and passing around, I might make subtle changes like Athena, but for me, that is the part when it comes out, right, and steps forward and starts to move around. I think we should feel a little bit of that volume. So minor adjustments, sure, but let that run a little bit wild. Like that's why we're doing this, right? So yeah, that was a great question. Moving forward, like, and I know y'all have had a couple of sessions about LFE, which have been really fantastic. And I've been thinking about LFE. I love LFE. I do not shy away from LFE. I'm always sad when it's not in a mix. And we do it, kind of like you've talked about, where you could have, say, a send here on my first send section, where we would send like on a 916 bed. If you wanted to run a send, you would send it straight to the LFE, right? And to do that, like if we were on our drums here, bass, whatever, we could run that out down here to where it says 916 out LFE, and that will go straight. It kind of bypasses the routing folder, goes straight to that assignment that you saw up here, and then has the processing applied to it. Where we've got our filters. This is very specific for this song. There's some nice 130 that's not typical for me, but there's some nice, really low growl that we're getting out of the bass guitar that I want in that LFE channel. So we have that happening. And then we'll talk about this in a second. I like to limit the LFE a little bit. And I say a little bit, you see that 28 and you're like, that's not a little bit. It is. Trust me, it is. But what happens is when we do that, all right, let's back up one notch. Heavy music, even modern pop, hip hop, rock, we're making these mixes loud when they're in stereo, and we're hitting limiters pretty hard, and we're still staying pretty aggressive regardless of loudness normalization and streaming platforms. And I master loud. All the mentors I have that I respect, they're still mastering loud. Nothing wrong with that. With a heavy genre though, if we do the send, we bypass the routing folder, and the sound of metal, the sound of hip hop and rap, the sound of modern pop is the sound of pushing into a limiter. It's that kick, it's that snare, it's those things pushing into that limiter a little bit. So I work backwards. Now that we are going through a routing folder, if you use, and there's some caveats to this, I'll explain. If you use this slider, it now hits the routing folder. And so then, and we'll talk about this too, scroll back up, in this 916 routing folder, I've got a limiter. So now I can apply a limiting to my Atmos mix. Thank you, FabFilter. I have no endorsement. I purchased this plugin. I'm so happy that they support multi-channel like this now. Now my kick, my bass, is affected by that limiter. Pre-LFE sent on the output down here. And that becomes really important. And so then we move into, so there's two ways to use LFE, the send and then direct, because then it hits this limiter. We need to not be afraid to put a little bit of limiting on our Atmos mixes. Now, it's going to raise some eyebrows. Now that we can do this, now that we have a 916 object bed, now that we have a tool like an L2, the one thing about modern mixing is moving into a limiter a little bit. Like when I'm doing stereo mastering, I still get stuff that was mixed through a limiter. Like a limiter has become kind of our sound. And so many times we're chasing the negative 18 LUFS and the negative 1 dB true peak, right? Again, these are specifications. These aren't requirements. You're not required to be at those numbers. At least once a day, I get the question, well, my LUFS is at negative 18.5, but my true peak is at negative 1. What do I do? And I just print it and leave it alone. Like, quit chasing these numbers. Does it feel good? Does it sound good? And so I have taken to putting a limiter on my Atmos mixes, and pushing into that limiter a dB or two. It starts to feel like a mix in the room to me. It starts to feel exciting in the room to me. It starts to feel like all of those things that we expect that music to do. to that, let's take a listen. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. But we'll solo this out, and the limiter is currently off. It's really subtle, and I don't know if y'all heard that, but things tighten. Things tighten, it gels. They are now a band again. They're all coming together. Suddenly the playing just feels tighter. The band just feels more in sync. Like everything just kind of locks. And to show the strings, we should talk about this number because it looks high. So notice the snares triggering that limiter by sometimes 5 dB. That's the sound of this genre. That's the sound of a lot of genres. Sometimes like in rap and hip hop, that would be kick. That would be subsynth. A lot of the subsynth stuff that we hear in those genres have a little bit of limiter distortion on them. We've gotten used to that. When we don't have that, we miss that. So what I do is if you come down here in this particular plugin, again, no endorsement with FabFilter. I've got this 1-to-1 on, and my true peak still set to -1. But what that means is as I move into the gain, it's auto adjusting the output. Because what I do is just before I put the limiter on, am I at -18? Am I at -1? Where am I? I set for spec in case for some reason this doesn't sound good. Occasionally it doesn't. Set for spec, make sure I'm within spec, and then start moving into this, right? And so we'll pull this down, and let's just move into it real quick. I don't know if y'all heard it, but right around 8 dB, 9 dB of gain, we started to feel that band come together. And then right around that 11.5 is when, for me, it started to feel like the stereo master, the stereo pre-master. So let's stop being afraid of limiting, and let's stop chasing numbers. Like I admire people wanting to be, I want to be at 18 and I want to be at 1. Let's serve the song, because I guarantee you when I print this, we're going to be at 18, but we're probably about 3 dB down. Our true peak is probably -3, and that's fine, because we're serving the music. So to that, you'll notice that in our object bed, we also have some they're inactive because of nulling earlier, but we've discovered some bus processing now that we have a 916 object bed. And to that, I'd like to turn that over to Athena and have her talk about that a little bit.
Thank you, Brad. Really great insight, I think, into the LFE usage, especially for this genre. I've learned a lot of great things from him. So as he mentioned, we've got some plugins that we might use on our routing folder. Now, for us, I would say one of the large draws to using this routing folder is the ability to have bus processing. We're so used to using bus processing in stereo mixing, and as he was just pointing out with the limiter, it helps glue the mix together. And even more important, I think, in such a dynamic format, you've got so many more other variables with immersive mixing that having that bus processing to just kind of glue it together a little bit more and match that stereo master is so valuable. It's just going to be a quick overview. These don't have any settings on them right now because that's going to be very song specific. This is some plugins that we might utilize to help kind of match that stereo master. And this is especially important if you're not sending your Atmos mix to an Atmos mastering engineer. I'm lucky to have an Atmos mastering engineer right next to me. I can just throw stuff his way. But if you are both the Atmos mixing engineer and mastering engineer, this might have some helpful insight for you. So first, always, maybe not always, but often, FabFilter Pro Q3, loved by everybody I know in the industry. Such a great plugin. FabFilter has really great stuff. This can be really great for some like slight corrective EQ, just kind of little elements to help it match. Another EQ that we might throw on is this EQ by Red Rock Sound. We're not endorsed by Red Rock Sound. It's a company that Brad found a little bit ago. Absolutely love them. What's really cool about them is that you can choose, so it defaults to stereo initially, but you can choose 714. You can also choose all the way here, 916. And you can select which channels you're changing or affecting, I should say. What I find this to be really effective on is, personally, I have found that elements that might sound kind of brighter in the stereo feel a little darker in the back of the room. So if we wanted to do a little bit of EQ, we can turn off a lot of this front, maybe side stuff, maybe the heights, depending on where you have it, LFE, and just affect the certain speakers that you want to be affecting. I think it's amazing. And you can also have different, so you can have one layer and then you can have an additional layer within the same plugin.
Wow. Athena, Brad, thank you both for sharing that deep dive. That was really a great presentation. I mean, with great insight and great explanations. I love your mantra of paying respect and honoring creative intent, and how you keep the timbral quality and the key characteristics of by maintaining the tone of the music there, and really using the space and precision available in the tool set to achieve that while trusting your ears. I think that's great approach and great messaging, and I'm sure the results speak for themselves. Cannot wait to hear some of this stuff coming up soon. As Greg mentioned, please add your questions, which we'll answer here in just a few moments. And be sure to add your name along with your questions so that we can address you, please. Athena, you're a member of the Women's Dolby Atmos Music Network, also known as Damn Women. And we are joined now by Dolby's Emma Brooks, who is also a member and an administrator. Emma, welcome. I'll hand it over to you to share a little bit more about the network and the great work you're doing there.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. As always, thank you for having me on. My name is Emma Brooks. I am a content and technical solutions engineer at Dolby, and I have the absolute pleasure of working with amazing engineers and partners across the studio ecosystem, including the incredibly talented Athena Wilkinson. So Athena, I know you were recently involved in an event called Mix Her in Nashville that was in partnership with engineers, Bose, She Is the Music, UMG, East Iris, and then, of course, Dolby. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that event and what your experience was?
Yeah, absolutely. It was an incredible experience. And I think I can speak for all the participants of it just being really amazing and such a community forming experience. In short, we got to help many women get certified in Dolby Atmos. So Engineers as a platform has their certification program that they do kind of online. And there's also typically an in-person element. Brad and I both went through that certification portion last year. And what was great was that, I don't know, I think there were like hundreds of women that applied to be just part of the certification online portion. So there were multitudes of women that got certified online. Myself, along with a fantastic other female Atmos engineer, Jenny Ortiz, got to kind of help out a little bit in Discord, answer any questions along with the online portion and just support those other female engineers starting out in Atmos. And then through all those amazing partnerships, there got to be 20 women sent to Nashville to actually finish out the certification course and get taught in person for the final aspect. And so it's an important part of Atmos mixing, as we all know, is hearing your mixes in an improved space. It's great to have these women certified and have them listening in headphones and getting started there, as it is for everybody. But what was so wonderful is that they got to hear their first Atmos mixes in an improved space. And it's always so fun to see their reactions and see like, oh, that didn't work at all. Because that happens to everybody. You try to have a vocal that's in every speaker and it sounds great in headphones, but in the room it's just mono and right next to you. I got to go as an instructor along with Jenny, Curtis, and Brian. We all got to instruct these women on Atmos, answer any questions in person. And then we also got to give them mixed feedback in the rooms. So they're hearing their Atmos mix they're hearing their Atmos mix for the first time in an Atmos room. Not only are they hearing it, but we're hearing it in the room and get to actually give feedback based on our experience as Atmos mix engineers that work in the format every day. I found it to be incredibly enlightening myself, actually. I learned a lot about some good practices, some different creative practices that might be employed, and just hearing all the different creative decisions from 20 different women was really incredible. I can't say enough about it. I could go on all day, but it was overall just a great experience.
It's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, well done to you and to the other instructors. It's just a great event, and hope to see more like it in the future. Absolutely. So on a separate but related note, as Ben mentioned, I wanted to talk a little bit about a group that I know you and I are both very excited and passionate about, which is our Dolby Atmos Music Network for Women, or as we affectionately call it, Damn Women. So this is a group that is dedicated to supporting engineers who are working in Dolby Atmos music, provides a network for collaboration, technical questions, resource sharing, education, and opportunities for amplification as well. So Athena, I know you're already deeply involved in the network with helping us plan topic suggestions, answering technical questions in the WhatsApp group. And then of course you gave a fantastic presentation at our last monthly meeting on mixing versus mastering in Dolby Atmos. So I would love if you could just share a little bit about your experience as a woman in this world of Dolby Atmos mixing, and then what you're excited about for this group.
I think I've been very fortunate, not only in Atmos, but in my general audio career, to have mentors. You can't see him. Brad's right next to me. To have some male mentors that have never put me down for my gender and have actually quite supported me for it. I feel really lucky because that's not everybody's experience. Within Atmos, I think it's interesting because it's such a new format to everybody. And I'm so excited for the potential of how many female and non-binary Atmos engineers there could be. To have it such a new format to anybody, I think it's an opportunity, right? It's an open opportunity to, quote, equal the playing field and actually have that representation. So I'm super excited. I feel very honored to be able to help teach the next generation of women, even though they're all my age, but yeah, teach the next generation of producers and engineers about Atmos and how to work on it. I feel really blessed to work on it every day and to work for an Atmos approved space. And just to be able to share that knowledge, because your average producer or engineer doesn't get that, right? They're working in headphones, they're working at home. So how do they start to have a client base in Atmos? How do they start to translate their mixes into Atmos spaces? And being able to connect with other Atmos professionals like Jenny, like Chiara Moreno, who I met in Nashville as well. So many great connections were made at Nashville. I see so many of those women on those Damn Women calls, which is so fun to just see that community growing. And I'm really excited for it to just grow every day. Chiara and I have talked a lot about potential topics for future meetings that we can have from it, both a technical standpoint and kind of a philosophical standpoint of what it means to be in this industry, not even necessarily as a woman, but just working in Atmos in general and how to do that. So yeah, I'm very excited.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've both had some really great mentors and are just excited to be able to pass on a lot of that knowledge to these other amazing women and people that are in this group. So we're around 75 members now. We are continuing to grow. We have, as mentioned, a WhatsApp group as well as regular Zoom meetings where we discuss topics from LFE, binaural settings, translation, room design, QC and artist approval. And we're constantly sort of crowdsourcing topics because we always want to make sure that we're providing relevant information and the resources needed to be successful and for these women to feel empowered with the tools and the knowledge. So if you are working in Dolby Atmos for music and you would like to be part of the network, please feel free to reach out to musicrelations@dolby.com, and we look forward to welcoming you.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Athena. We're all so excited to see the momentum and the energy happening within the network for sure. With that, let's jump into Q&A. Please add your name along with your questions, and we will answer them now. All right. Thank you all for the really great questions pre-submitted and asked during the session. We answered many of them in real time, as always, so hope that was helpful. First, quickly, Brad, I want to throw it to you. Can you share a little bit about the availability of the amazing stems from the band Periphery that you showed in your demonstration on this session, please?
Absolutely, Ben. So Periphery have pretty much, I think, all of the stems available from all of their previous albums on their label for 3 Dot Recordings. And so the stems for this album, to be clear, they came from Periphery 5, Gent is not a genre, are available at the 3 Dot site. And they're impeccable stems. Like, it's, if you're first, getting started in Atmos, this is a great way to get started. great file set. Things are fairly separated out, and they're really affordable. So I think Greg's going to share the link. There it is. So you can head down to 3dot and pick that up from the guys.
Yeah, Greg, you might just want to pop those into the chat for everybody to be able to see as well. And I will thank you for that, Brad. I'll tee you up for the next question, Greg. And this is one that Ninad asked a little bit about last month, and hopefully we can provide some clarification to you, Ninad. If not, of course, you can email us at musicrelations@dolby.com. But the question, Greg, is does the binaural true peak level have any influence over the playback level on DSPs?
So just to be clear, thanks. It's a great question. So just to reiterate that the binaural export is obviously is able to be played back on DSPs using sort of binaural headphones if you're not in a specific speaker-based environment with discrete channels. So in terms of how does that affect the playback on the DSPs? So the main thing to understand is that most or some DSPs provide their own loudness management. So Apple has their own, for instance. So the actual true peak from the binaural isn't influencing that. Now, one of the things I wanted to make sure as I kind of went back and reread the question is, the understanding that the ADM, the actual Dolby Atmos master, is what affects the output of the binaural, not the other way around. So the binaural is really generally a file export for reference in QC. It's not an asset that you would use to encode, right? So I just wanted to make sure I provide that clarification. So I hope that answers your question, Ninad.
Yep. Thanks, Greg. One more for you from Alejandro on loudness. Is it obligatory to master Atmos at -18 LUFS? I know engineers are mixing and ignoring the LUFS value, and then they just go to the album assembler and make the Dolby mix measure -18. How do you manage that?
So the quick and short of it, in terms of managing that for the actual output of the album, using the album assembler to do that's actually one of the things the album assemblers created to do, is to help you manage that. Now, in terms of it being obligatory, the -18 LUFS is that's your ending point. That's your ceiling. You can actually deliver something that's a bit quieter if you want, if that's the desire, from an artistic standpoint, to kind of retain dynamics and keep it at a specific level lower than that. You're more than welcome to. Obviously, you want to make sure it's not too soft. You want it to be audible. But in terms of it being obligatory, there are a lot of recommendations from labels and DSPs in terms of -18 LKFS being the ceiling.
And that's going to give you the best possible target for translation. And again, it's about that range that's in there as well, with that being the loudest in most cases. Okay, Brad, over to you for one from Julian. How do you overcome phase shifting with the guitar wall sound in Dolby Atmos?
That's a great question. I haven't necessarily experienced any sort of phase shifting with kind of that wall of sound guitars. If you're working in a room with speakers, if you're working in an actual multi-speaker setup, I would say it's probably really important to make sure that your speakers are time aligned. That's crucial to prevent any sort of phasing in the room. If you're working in headphones, then make sure that your source material is at least phase coherent. So if you've got more than one microphone on a guitar amp or using multiple guitar stems or things like that, make sure that those are phase coherent, because that might be what you're experiencing.
Great, thank you. Athena, Brad, we'll throw one to you here as a follow-up from Tony. How do you use the center speaker? Do you sidechain all the bus compression channels on your beds, let them be independent, or use a linked 714 compressor? And do you master what you mix?
Yeah, I can start with that. So in terms of the center speaker, it can depend on the element or the instrument that is being used. Typically with drums and lead vocals in particular, and Brad might have a slightly different answer, but for me, especially lately, I've been leaning away from the actual center percentage. Like in the Pro Tools panel, you've got that center percentage. And I go pretty low, sometimes even down to 0, because especially for those drums and the lead vocals, I want it to hit the same. And something about the Phantom Center just feels better, feels more accurate to the stereo and what we're used to, what we're expecting to hear as listeners, especially for a genre like this, where you want it to hit heavier. And for the other questions, we always master what we mix, whether that's in stereo or Atmos. Always very passionate about that. I think we talked about, we typically utilize the object bed, and that allows us to utilize that bus processing, right? And that's what we typically like to use. Brad can touch on it a little bit more, but if there are elements where we have to, especially from a mastering perspective, if somebody else used objects along with an object bed or just objects, what have you, because there's a lot of different workflows that people use. There's a lot of side chaining that can be involved with that. Absolutely.
Great points, Athena. Yeah, I've shied away a little bit from the center speaker when I am tasked with mixing something in Atmos, but I didn't necessarily do the stereo mix because a lot of those stems I'm going to get in are stereo, and a lot of those stems are going to have Phantom Center. When we start involving that center channel, it's going to sound different to the artist. Volume changes. When we don't fight, we have to deal with nulling a little bit more. I do like to use a little bit of it. I kind of like a little bit of something in my center, though, so it might be 1%. So I take that center, I dial it all the way down to 0, and I might bring a little bit in. So I might add a little bit of bass guitar, a little bit of kick, a little bit of snare, a little bit of vocal, those kind of things that we would expect in a center channel anyway. Let's see. And then I think there was a question about bus compressor. Yeah, so because we use a object bed, and then we use routing folders that feed that object bed, we're actually to have more control over bus compression. Companies like, Red Rock Sound, companies like Waves, companies like PSP, companies like FabFilter, they have these multi-channel aware plugins that are just really, really great to use and make that process easy for us. And as far as mastering, we absolutely master what we mix. And Athena's right. Like, a lot of times we're using object beds, and that makes the mastering process easier. But when we get something from outside that might use an object bed plus additional objects, we have to involve some pretty crafty side chaining based on the stereo pre-master, which is always fun. It's always a fun problem to solve. Those are great questions.
Great, thank you. Brad and Athena, from Harold, in terms of your approach, do you approach mixing in Dolby Atmos to mimic the stereo version, or do you picture it as how it was mixed before, all in mono, where you place the instruments in a specific location, or is it a totally different approach?
I'll start with this one again. To me, it's a mix of approaches, right? So we talked about it a lot, and the kind of presentation of making sure that we're staying true to the intention of the stereo, staying true to the genre intention, to the artistic intention. That's very, very important. And we really like to pay respect to that. And that's part of why we value the nulling aspect so much. To that, though, it is immersive, right? It's a different format, and there's also a different respect for that. And you can, depending on the genre in particular, but you can make it feel like you're in the room with the musicians, or you can just completely immerse, as is the intention, immerse yourself in the music. So for heavy music, I like to think of it more as just a complete immersion of hitting hard and heaviness. That's why we like this music, while also staying true to what fans are expecting to hear and what the artist is used to and what the artist wants to hear and what the stereo mix already did. The artist is already happy with the stereo mix and master. We're not trying to completely change that. We're just trying to bring it into this newer format.
Great, thank you. I could take this one from Mark. He is asking, can you use the Bose 600 soundbar and Bose 500 bass? Thank you. And the answer is that they are enabled for Dolby Atmos, so you certainly could use them to QC or listen to Dolby Atmos music in a consumer environment. So yes, indeed. Brad and Athena from Michael, great question here, talking about specifically treating different types of sounds in this kind of heavy music environment. Can low frequency instruments such as 5-string bass, kick, floor tom, and subsamples such as an 808 be positioned as objects, or are they best still rendered in the traditional front LCR? And then a follow-up to that is, does the binaural renderer require a different mix compared to rendering multi-channel like in a car or a home theater?
Sure, I'll kick that one off. That is a great question. We're not just talking about LFE, we're actually talking about specific elements. To that, an object can be placed anywhere in the room. So if you have a 5-string bass, that could certainly be an object That doesn't necessarily have to go in the bed. That can still stay. You've got your center controls that can still say, center speaker. You can create phantom center, that kind of stuff. Personally, I like to bring my bass and my 808s a bit off the wall. I like that 5-string bass to be about 15% off the wall, 808s to be about 15% off the wall, so about an 85% setting. I like them to feel like they're kind of in front of me. And to that, remember, respect that nulling like we talked about in the video. So you can still have those things be objects. You can still have those things hit just as hard. It's not that the bed makes things hit any harder. It's just how we treat them. And so as long as you're serving the song, you're gonna be great. And then I think the other question was about the binaural re-render required different mix compared to. I have found no, it does not require a different mix. That you should always be referencing as you're working in the room and things are feeling good in the room. Check your binaural re-render. And even though you might be matching a stereo mix, check your 2.0, because you never know what's going to happen out there in the field when stuff gets released. So just constantly be referencing that.
Great, thank you. And with that, we will bring the session to a close. I see, Michael Leader, you asked your question here in the Q&A function, which was also a pre-submitted question. Thank you for that. We'll get back to you personally to make sure that we understand and can answer you completely. So I'd like to thank Brad, Athena, and as always, Greg, for this great session. Thank you to everyone for all of the great questions. Thank you to Emma as well for her great conversation as always. And with that, we will see you next time. Thank you very much.